Welcome to the Motion Racing Podcast, which isn't so much a racing podcast. We sometimes like, we sometimes like to talk about road cars, and potentially the most consequential road car in quite some time has just launched. It's the Ferrari Luce. It's the first electric Ferrari. It has design input of levels that we'll talk about in a minute from Jony Ive's company Love From, and it's attracted significant controversy. I'd say probably skewing on the hate side rather than the love side from the internet so far, in spite of the name of the design company that launched it. But to get into it and talk about it, because I think we need to really sort of understand why it is what it is and why it came out when it did and how we should talk about it, perhaps. I've got Georgie Mackay, who I think, not that you've come spoiling for a fight, Georgie, exactly, but I think I may see a red baseball bat behind you somewhere. And the good doctor, Jonathan Gitlin, who has been on the pod before and talking about IMSA last time. And it's great to be talking about road cars again. We also talked about the Lucid Air back in the day as well, and I guess that was another controversial EV, but maybe it's easier to be controversial, Jonathan, when you're starting off with with an established road car brand rather than a startup like Lucid was.
Yeah, I think any non-traditional Ferrari is always going to be controversial. Anything that's not a two-seat, two-door, preferably mid-engined, preferably red Ferrari is going to annoy a lot of self-proclaimed purists, and particularly one that has 5 seats and 4 doors and no internal combustion engine. I mean, that's like all 3 of their buttons being pushed right at once. It was always going to be, this car was always going to have a difficult reception. And I don't think it's just Ferrari. I mean, if you look the week before, all the same people on the internet were talking about how much they hate the new AMG GT and how terrible an electric car that is, and this is awful, and why is AMG making electric cars? And a week later it's this Ferrari's awful, and why is it an electric car, and why is Ferrari making electric cars? I have to say I was underwhelmed when I first saw it, or at least on the outside, but the kind of vehemently negative, dare I say, unhinged reaction from so many people online really made me reconsider that. And pretty much by the time my flight had landed from Rome on Monday evening, I was starting to appreciate its design more and more, I think, in reaction to just people being outraged for the sake of being outraged.
I should point out you went there with your publication, or the publication you write for. You were there at the launch writing for them. Georgie, it sounds from what Jonathan says like this is all just a bunch of haters, maybe the same people who disliked the Ghostbusters trailer, maybe the same people who disliked anything to do with new Star Wars. Is this just the standard alt-right backlash, or is there something more to it?
Maybe there's an element of that to it, because I personally quite enjoy this car, and I think that's probably the fight that you're expecting. Is I even like it aesthetically. I make no bones about that. I like how it looks. I think it's a fantastic little car, or slightly bigger than little car. But yeah, there's definitely a current of people that will hate any electric vehicle, regardless what you put in front of them. But I think Ferrari have done a good job with this one, honestly.
Right. I mean, I think the thing is, I can see why some of the reaction was, as you put it, unhinged, Jonathan. If you look at the car, it does look nothing, or almost nothing, like you would expect a Ferrari to. Mm-hmm. But as we'll dig into later, I think maybe that was part of the point. And I'd love to sort of get into a bit of chin-strokey philosophy about car design and whether it actually needs to be the same or not. You know, because we do tend to think of car brands a bit like cherished teddy bears. They always have to be the same, you know. But let's start by talking about the launch, because it looks like quite an exciting occasion. I guess any new Ferrari launch always is, but so where was it? How did you get there?
I hate these things. They're awful, to be honest.
You hate them? Go on.
Yeah, they're if it was up to me, they would just give me the briefing book, show me the car in a room, let me talk to the engineers, and I could go home. I don't need to sit with 300 people whilst they do an hour-long light show and bring people up on stage and talk and tell me the things they told me previously in briefings 8-9 months ago. Just show me the car is all I really want to see. So it was a little bit arduous. I had to give up a long weekend and schlep all the way over to Europe, where it was very hot, and actually had a lot of didn't get really to see the Indy 500 or Canadian Grand Prix until well after the fact, so that was kind of annoying. But I suppose the date they picked was because the Monday was the 79th anniversary of Ferrari's first ever race win, which I think which was the reason they chose to launch the car then. It was nice to finally see the actual full-size car, sit in it and see the interior components that weren't just on display. It's like, here's the steering wheel or here's an entertainment screen, here's the whole thing all put together. And the interior was really nice. I think that will sell lots of Luces, I think. It's a bit like the BMW i7, which also has a spectacularly good interior and a somewhat challenging exterior. But the reason the outside looks the way it does is basically because of aerodynamics. So Ferrari said, although Love From is responsible for the styling, and I think Mark Newson's influence is as much in that car as Jony Ive. Newson designed the 021C concept for Ford a long time ago, and then obviously his Ichabod watches. I think you can see a lot of that influence there as much as you see Apple or the iPhone. Although lots of people did say to me at the time, whilst they were there, they were like, "Oh, I bet you the Apple car looked like that in 2018." But the main reason the outside looks the way it does is because of aero. So Ferrari say they started their first aerodynamic studies 7 years ago, and then they greenlit the project 5 years ago. I'm not exactly sure when Love From were brought on, but if you look at the cross section, it looks very sort of midway between a Model 3 and a Model Y. And that shape is because they wanted a low drag coefficient, which I don't think, I heard 0.25, but I don't know if that's right. It's apparently the lowest drag Ferrari ever, although it's not just low drag. They did still try and put some downforce in there, which is why the drag coefficient's not as low as Mercedes' new CLA or something. But yeah, the way it looks the way it does because of airflow.
If we can sort of just get a bit anarchy about the side of the car, I think what makes it look proportionally weird for me is the way that they've blacked out that part just in front of the wheel at 3/4, because to me that makes it look like it's on its haunches, like the Toyota CHR does, for example. The only car named after something you should do if you're pissed off with your boss. I think that's the reason it looks weird, and I think it might be again falling under people's conceptions of what a Ferrari should look like. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so. I think also it was also very color dependent. I don't think the red one looked way better, but there were almost no images of the red ones in the images they provided, and security was incredibly strict. So not only did my editor-in-chief and I had to sign an embargo saying that if we published early, we would give Ferrari $500,000, which is rather scary. And then whilst we were in the venue, we were constantly being hassled by security guards to make sure that all of the cameras on our phones were covered up with the red stickers. And they would come and take a look at your phone, and it's already covered in red stickers. And no, we're going to put another layer on top of them. The phone was half red stickers by the end of it, so we couldn't take our own images. And the Ferrari ones I think didn't always do the best job of showing that, because depending on the angle that you see that car from, obviously it looks much better or worse. And I'm not sure that the photos they supplied did the best job of showing its best face, particularly that yellow color, which I'm told was very popular amongst the Chinese, but I didn't like it. Yellow was wrong.
It's funny how certain demographics have certain tastes, isn't it? Georgie, Jony Ive famously, of course, transformed people's idea of what an Apple product should be. Before Steve Jobs took a chance on him as a young man on the design team, they were still back end of producing the Apple Lisa and the Apple Newton, and they had to chuck all that stuff out, as is famously described in many books and films. In a way, do we have to go through this phase of people hating on design in order for people to like it eventually, Georgie?
I think there's always an element of conflict when coming to progress, if you know what I mean, because you have to push against something. And that's not to say that this Ferrari is completely disengaged from any previously designed Ferrari. I think there's elements of 40 years of Ferrari's design in there, at least. You can see the F40 in the rear lights. You can see the 499P, Ferrari's current Le Mans car, in the headlights as well. Not just that the lights are the only things that apply to Ferrari's history. Those are just the most standout features to me at the moment. But, I think there's still Ferrari DNA in there. This is just Ferrari's way of pushing the boundaries. So maybe anything, as we said before, any EV would be hated. This is a a break of the mold for Ferrari in a lot of ways, especially with it not just being an EV, but it being a 5-seater as well. And at the same time, having over 1,000 horsepower. It's ostensibly a pretty silly car, you know?
Yeah, I think the whole 5-seaterness of it is the thing I want to get onto because I must admit, I was one of those unhinged people. I reacted on the Discord. I think the words I used were, what the actual F is that design? And I then compared it to the British Leyland ECV3 prototype of 1984, which, I don't think was maybe the impression that Ferrari were going for, although I'm not part of their core buying demographic. But it's a strange old car to look at least at first, and I think that may have been what caused former Ferrari chair and chief executive and president Luca de Montezemolo to be quite so unhelpful when he said, if I were to say what I really think, I'd be doing Ferrari a disservice. Fine, leave it there, Luca. But no, he continues, we risk destroying a legend, and I'm truly sorry about that. I hope they at least remove the prancing horse from that car. So Luca's been firing shots for years, and clearly he is quite bitter in a sort of Tywin Lannister way about the way he's been removed in a palace coup. But was he merely trying to be unhelpful, as I suggested, Jonathan, or was he trying to warn others about what might happen if that Ferrari DNA is lost? And I want to
No, I think he's being utterly unhelpful. I mean, the thing is, Ferrari needs an emissions-free vehicle to sell in markets like China and Europe, right? That's non-negotiable. You have to have a new energy vehicle in China. Chinese customers don't have 70, 80 years of Ferrari, let's say, heritage to stick to. I think the same probably applies in Silicon Valley. And the other thing I think really with this car, so additionally, energy density for batteries being what it is, there was no way they were going to make an electric 2-seater. It had to be, it was going to have to be something that seats 5, because if you've got 122 kilowatt hours of battery, then that's a big enough slab that you're going to put 5 people sitting on top of it. Otherwise it's, a waste of time. And I think the most important thing with this car is that they're going to get sold to the Ferrari customer who wants a daily driver because he works in Silicon Valley and he works at NVIDIA and he just vested $30 million in shares this year and wants to spend it on something. It's going to sell to Ferrari owners in China who want to be able to drive the car every day again. It'll sell to Ferrari customers who think buying one will get them, moved up the line to get the next SP3 or whichever, special car that costs 6 times as much. The market for that, it's a Ferrari that happens to be electric, and it might not look like, every other Ferrari, but I mean, some of those current Ferraris right now look pretty minging. I mean, is it the F80 that?
Well, the one I was going to talk about
Daytona, but I mean, it looks more like it's made out of Lego Technic to me.
The one I was going to talk about was the Testarossa. What an ugly brick that is, by the way.
And the Puro Sangue is pretty hideous too. I spent a couple of hours driving one around Rome. The interior is much better than most other modern new Ferraris. Not as good as the Puro Sangue, but in terms of like Ferrari's HMI was a big improvement. But yeah, I mean, the Puro Sangue I think people hate too. And again, those cars sell, the purists hate them, but they sell really well. I think it's something like 20% of Ferrari sales here in the US of Puro Sangues now. And I think, people buy them because, not just because it's a daily driver, well, the one that gets 11 miles per gallon, but also, gets you in good graces with your Ferrari dealer. And whether it's Ferraris or Porsches or Rolexes or Hermes handbags, the world we live in seems to be that if you want these, high-end luxury goods, you have to play the game with the shops.
And I guess, Georgie, it's been a while now since this has been the case, so maybe we shouldn't complain about it, but Ferrari is essentially a fashion brand, isn't it? In the same way that certain fashion brands will not sell you their most sought after items until you've got one of the others. Like, I believe there's a similar process to getting an F80 that there is to getting a Birkin bag. You can't just buy one, basically. So if I started complaining about the Birkinification of Ferrari, am I sort of aiming my guns at something that's already gone and happened a long time ago, Georgie?
I think probably Ferrari perhaps being one of the most iconic lifestyle brands of, the modern era, up there with sort of like, I don't know, Hugo Boss. I'm really plucking at straws right now because Ferrari is truly that iconic. This car's honestly, it's the kind of thing that Jeremy Clarkson 15 years ago would have introduced on Top Gear as an electric family car made by Ferrari, and he'd argue it was the most sensible vehicle they'd ever built. And then he'd tell you it's got 1,000+ horsepower. It's, it's fantastic to see that Ferrari can visualize this step forward while at the same time keeping their identity in the vehicle, you know what I mean? So I think maybe for me, De Montezemolo's vision is just a bit lacking in that respect.
Can we actually talk about how mediocre the technical specs are? Also, I mean, you can tell that this is very much Ferrari's first EV, because if you compare it to companies that are, Lucid's been iterating for a while now. Porsche has 5 years of experience with the Taycan. BMW's on their 6th generation EV platform. Mercedes, they're now probably in their 2nd gen stuff where it's all done in house. And if you compare the specs on the Luce to the AMG GT with its axial flux motors, or the Lucid Sapphire with the energy density they're getting out of their motors, or the power density, or the Taycan Turbo GT, I think you could probably buy a Turbo GT and a Lucid Air Sapphire and a Mercedes AMG GT for about the same price as a decently optioned Purosangue, and all of those cars will charge faster and they have better range efficiency and they're faster than 60 miles an hour. Again, I think you buy the Ferrari not because it's the ultimate fastest or has the longest range or whatever. I think it's because it's a Ferrari.
Right, and so in a way, the tech specs didn't need to be amazing because they were selling it based on the kind of experience of owning one, the experience of driving one every day and having that interior and so on. And also being in the same car that Lewis Hamilton, or LH as he's now known, and Charles Leclerc, tested. And I think a big part of the PR of a brand is still racing drivers testing or pretending to have developed the car. It's why the Honda NSX is still legendary, because Ayrton Senna supposedly breathed on it for a few laps at Suzuka and made it better. How much of an influence do you think those social videos by Ferrari were last week, Georgie? Because Lewis and Charles are part of that group of F1 drivers who are very, very good at pretending to be good friends with each other, but they actually seemed to be having some genuine fun there, didn't they?
Yeah, they looked like they were enjoying the car. At least Charles seemed concerned for his life in the same way that you might be when you get into the car with a colleague you don't really know that well. And I think it was fun to see, and often that's all it takes to sell a product nowadays. We've not even nowadays, for the history of consumerism, really, we've seen models, actors, actresses sell things like perfume and cologne. So it only makes sense to have drivers selling cars, and to have Ferrari's arguably their two most iconic drivers at the moment. No shade to the Le Mans team or to any of their other drivers, of course. I think it may have done a lot for them on social media because of the amount of engagement that have drawn to the vehicle. There are plenty of people that will watch motorsports that don't necessarily care about Ferrari, that will follow Lewis Hamilton but won't follow Ferrari, that will follow Charles Leclerc but won't follow Ferrari. So I think it puts it on a lot of feeds in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did also want to ask about because obviously Ferrari and Pininfarina did have a long relationship, and at roughly the same time that the politics with Marchione and then with Elkann were going on, Ferrari seemed to completely dump Pininfarina. Jonathan, what actually went on there? Because obviously Ferraris since Pininfarina have looked very, very different to Ferraris before, and I think that's causing part of the schism for people like me, because it's just nothing like what you expect a Ferrari to be, like I said before.
So I think the last mainstream Ferrari that was a Pininfarina design was the F12 Berlinetta in 2012. So it's actually, they set up Centro Stile, which is their in-house styling division. Well, after that, I think maybe 2017 sometime, but they decided they wanted to bring it in-house, basically, and then stop using Pininfarina and other external consultants. And then obviously decided to change that when it was time to do their EV, because they ran off to Newsom and Ive and said, hey, Love From, can you do that for us? But yeah, I don't think there was any particular big falling out with Pininfarina. I think it was just a desire to bring it in-house to do their Ferraris themselves.
Right, because a lot of my luxury car buying takes place through buying Hot Wheels from the supermarket, and I noticed that because Hot Wheels didn't have any Ferrari license whatsoever, and I think still doesn't for various reasons, they had made a model of the Pininfarina Battista, which is essentially as close as Pininfarina's got to making its own version of a Ferrari it would like to make, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same shape as a 458, which is the same shape as a 488, which is the same shape as a F8. It's basically the same shape as a 296, really. Well, not quite, but almost. But yeah, I mean, they are. The Battista is very similar to, I think, the 458. And I think there's another one that also looks the same. Mahindra bought them at the end of 2015, and that's why Ferrari. But then, again, like I said, I think the last series Ferrari that was designed by Pininfarina was actually predates that. But I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe that has something to do with it.
Yeah, maybe. Well, yeah, I mean, it's certainly interesting to look at where Ferrari styling has gone.
I mean, people got super angry when Bertoni styled that 308 GT. Was it the GT4?
GTB. Yeah.
The GTB, the one with back seats, and it was very boxy and didn't look anything like the 308. No, the 308 GTB was the Pininfarina one that Magnum drove, or he drove a 328. And then there was the boxy one that also used that same engine that had back. It was a 2+2, and people hated it at the time. Well, it was designed by Bertoni.
I did say earlier that the Testarossa was an ugly brick. I'll never forgive Ferrari for painting that black Zorro mask on the bonnet of its new cars. But I mean, not the original Testarossa, but the first reboot Testarossa, the 1980s one from Miami Vice, was also not a great looker. I mean, Georgie, are we a bit over nostalgizing a bit how beautiful Ferraris have always been?
I think not really. Actually, I'm gonna be one of the herd here, where I say Ferrari historically have made some pretty beautiful cars. Even their bad ones have been pretty beautiful in a lot of ways. I'll make no bones about the fact that my favorite historical car, my favorite classic car, is the Dino 246 GTS. That's my favorite Ferrari from the history of Maranello, all of their works. It's a Dino. It's a Ferrari that they didn't even want to put their own name on. And even if the Luce ends up getting what De Montezemolo wants and it gets a Dino badge as well, I still think it'll contribute to that design philosophy as well. Like I said before, I think it's got elements for the last 40 years of Ferrari in it, and I think we'll look back on it fondly. I've joked about it looking a bit like a sporty Honda E, and I'm not going to lie, the Honda E makes everyone happy everywhere it goes. You see a Honda E, you point at it and you go, oh, look, a Honda E. I think
it definitely looked like an E when it drove out on stage head on with the black mask. As soon as it turned slightly sideways and you could see it was like heavily scalloped, that kind of resemblance went away. But when it was head on, absolutely Honda E.
Yeah, I was in the process of, before recording this podcast, of trying to, I don't know if you've seen those meme videos where people take two cars and they smush the image of one car onto another car to make it that other car. I was really trying to do that with the Honda E onto the Ferrari, but I just couldn't get it to work with the scalloping. I really wanted it to. But
well,
yeah.
So Marcus Brownlee said that it looked a bit like a BYD had eaten a Ferrari.
I also heard a Hyundai had eaten a Ferrari. Someone else said that.
Right, yeah. So it does have that sort of styling that suggests that there is a sports car inside it, and maybe in some ways that's deliberate somehow. But I wanted to bring up a design name from the past, really, and Chris Bangle, the Jeremy Clarkson's nemesis for many years on Top Gear, because he was the chief designer of BMW from about 1998, I think, until 2010, roughly. And in that time, he pumped out some of the most eccentric at the time looking BMWs. But they're now, compared to what BMW are producing now, they look positively mainstream. They look positively dull and old. And I wonder if this is just the flow of how we understand new car designs. I mean, I'll start with you, Jonathan. Like, is this just the case that we start off with something that's way out there? You know, like people said that about the Ford Focus, that it looked like a concept car, and then all of a sudden we're bored with it because we see thousands of them. But we're never going to get bored with this one because we're almost never going to see it unless we live in Dubai, so or you know, Fremont, California, or something.
People are resistant to change, and I think right now there's kind of I think personally there's a bigger sociological thing going on, which is that everyone is kind of angsty and upset with the state of the world. And you see it expressed as unhinged takes about very low consequence things like, here's a new electric Ferrari that a handful of people are going to buy. So let's spend a week being really angry about it, because actually we're probably really angry about other things. But it's an easy thing to like vent about. Maybe I'm just being a pop psychologist. I don't know. But I think there's a little bit of that going on. And no, I said earlier, I think there's, Bangle's designs were, you're right, they were super controversial at the time, and they've aged well. And I think that's the case with a lot of designs that, we were talking about good looking Ferraris. I don't know if either of you consider the Enzo attractive. I still don't, but lots of people do. And I think it didn't land very well at the time, but then people came around to it.
I loved the Enzo when it came out.
There you go. See, that's, I think it's why its design is very subjective, and it's why I try not to, like, when I write about cars, I don't write a huge amount about design for my audience, because I think it is very subjective, and I think certainly a lot of my readers have different takes than I do. So, as I found over the years.
So, Georgie, you said you liked the Enzo. I do admit, when you look back at it, you can see where they were getting at with the shapes. It was at the time when all Formula One cars were high-nosed, and it does have a sort of a, dummy high-nose type construction on the grille, but there were lots of clever things about the Enzo, and I think, looking back, it has aged well compared to how it looked when it launched. But is it all about us kind of looking back to when we were age 7 and thinking, would we have this as a poster on our wall, or have sports cars moved on, Georgie? Do we need to stop thinking in that way and start thinking about how 3/4 of all Lamborghinis sold are apparently Uruses these days? Is that just the way the market's going, and we can't do anything about it?
I think while there definitely is a bit of a market push towards everything on the road being an SUV nowadays, whether it's electric or otherwise, I think there's still a bit of whimsy in the modern car market, especially when you look towards things like electric hot hatches. I'm going to say that as an electric hatchback owner, of course, but I think the Ferrari's in that sort of zone of it's an electric car that's trying to be fun in a Ferrari way, So I think there's a nostalgia in that in and of itself, in that it's a car that's kind of just trying to be a car and at the same time trying to be unique in being a car. Most cars sort of feel quite similar nowadays, at least when you get them at the similar price points or similar performance points. Most hatchbacks you get nowadays are either 60, 90 or 140 horsepower, and they all pretty much feel the same in those bands, you know what I mean? But I think Ferrari have at least tried to create a car that evokes the feeling of getting a brand new Ferrari and it genuinely being something new and something different, If you're the kind of person that's going to buy a Ferrari, that is to say. I'm certainly not going to be able to afford one, but I can imagine if you are the kind of person that, as we said earlier, needs to sweeten the deal with your dealership to get the next generation of FX number year or whatever, then maybe this is exactly the kind of car that excites you because you can drive your kids to school in it, every day.
That was definitely something they talked about during the briefings, was about being able to share like the Ferrari experience with more than just, one passenger, and the fact that you can take your friends or your kids for rides.
And is that, I know you've talked about Ferrari as daily driver, but it is something that's going to cost, I think, more than €500,000. Surely for that much, you wouldn't buy a daily driver for that much. You buy whatever. You buy a Model 3 or a Model Y, and then buy the Ferrari as the... Sorry?
No, if you're a billionaire.
Not if you just don't want to buy a Tesla.
Yeah, if you've got, like I said, if you work for NVIDIA, say, and, you've just made $30 million this year, a $700,000 EV is not really much of a drop in the bucket, and you'd look pretty cool. So, I think I honestly just think it's a different world that the people who buy these cars live in. And I don't think anyone who would ever consider buying a Ferrari Luce as a daily driver would have a Model 3. I just don't see it, but...
I do find that slightly surprising, and it's a given really that as you've been to plenty of race circuits and plenty of car launches, you've probably been around more billionaires than I have. So I'll say that, but I find that surprising because I was always told that what made people billionaires was the fact that they didn't spend money unless they had to.
That might have been true in the olden days before there were so many of them. But if you just have to go along the Mediterranean from the Portugal all the way to Croatia or keep going and look at how many yachts are in how many marinas and harbors down the entire coastline, and think how expensive each one of those is to operate. Like, there's a lot of money out there. I might not have very much of it, but, someone's hoarding it all. And, I think the production numbers of this car are not going to be particularly high. So, I think I have a feeling they will probably sell all of the ones they can build. And honestly, I'm curious. I don't know how many of them are actually even going to come to America, because if they do need to sell them in China and Europe for emissions reasons, like, they've got a serious incentive just not to even bother importing that many here, particularly given the anti-EV sentiments that we're currently enjoying.
I think you can argue the whole way down the pyramid of why wouldn't you just buy a Model Y? Why wouldn't you just buy an Urus? Why wouldn't you just buy a Tonale at that point? The people that are going to buy this car are buying this car because it's a Ferrari. That's what we keep going back to, isn't it? It's because it's a Ferrari.
So just to close the conversation, and it has been a remarkably civil conversation compared to what I was expecting. I've got to be honest, folks. Thanks so much. But Jonathan, if you had that sort of money, would you buy one? Or if not, what would you go for?
I mean, I really like the interior. So if money were no object, yeah, that interior is nice enough that I would like to spend my days driving it. But money's always an object, and I would probably have a hard time not buying a Taycan just because I really like Porsches and they're really quite good. But then I don't need a Taycan Turbo GT either. I mean, I'd be quite happy with just the rear-wheel drive one's really good because it's got less weight over the nose. Or a GTS is nice, They're all pretty good. Just
before I ask Georgie the same question, I'll come back on the Taycan, because one point I put in the notes is we've talked a lot about styling and how sometimes things can be a bit too futuristic for modern day. The Taycan looked very much of its time when it came out. It was meant to look like a 911, so people didn't get, freaked out by it. And now it looks positively old because it's been around, and because we, or at least, we tend to see one every month, if we live in a big city or something. Has it been spoilt by its ubiquity, or is it still as nice a car as it was, do you think?
I mean, I don't think so. I really like the shape of it. I would, I'm weird. I would probably take one over a 911 at this point, because unless it was the 911 with the new hybrid engine, because the EV just has so much better throttle response. Like, you touch the accelerator pedal and it goes, whereas the combustion engines, you still have to suck the air in and the pistons have to move, and it takes like a quarter of a second before anything happens. And I don't like that. But the view from the driver's seat is basically the same. You see the wings and, the dash, and you sit down low. But you're right. I think the Taycan I like to think of it like a modern day 928 that has usable rear seats because it's got back doors. I still like the way it looks. I don't like the facelifted lights as much. I prefer the original. But I'm also weird because I prefer the 4-door to the Cross Turismo. Whereas normally I like a wagon or an estate, but not in this case. So
maybe
the 4-door looks more pure. I think it's the way it goes straight down rather than the wagon. Always makes me think it's a Panamera, first of all, for some reason.
Maybe this is where the fight really starts, because I historically have no interest in Porsches at all. Even to the extent of this far into my sim racing career, it's still a joke that I don't buy Porsches. All of the Porsches that I own have been bought for me by other people when we've needed them for endurance races.
Yeah, they're such good cars to drive, though. That's the thing. It's funny, as a company, they don't really have to try very hard with the whole PR stuff because they know, like, the cars will sell themselves.
I've always thought that they live and die by the biggest selling point being the lap time that they get at the Nürburgring, because I've said that I don't buy any Porsches. That doesn't mean I don't drive any of them. I've driven quite a few of them, quite a lot actually, because they're good cars.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the aesthetics of them, but what's underneath the bonnet it speaks for itself, And I think the same can be said with the Taycan. It's still the same way. I may live in an area where I see 4 or 5 every day, but maybe they do seem a little bit old hat to me now. But that's probably because of that skewed amount of prevalence of how
growing
often
up
I
in
see
London,
them.
you get very inured to 911s because they're basically as common as, Toyota Corollas there. And then you move somewhere else and realize, wow, every other car on the road is not actually a 911. Well, maybe I had a slightly warped upbringing in this city.
Yeah. But it's fascinating to have this discussion. But just before we finish, Georgie, I'll ask you the same question. If you had billionaire money, would you buy the Luce, or would you buy something else first?
In when you say would I buy something else first, that implies would I buy the Luce anyway? And if I had that amount of money, then probably yes, I would buy it anyway. But I definitely don't think it would be the first thing that I bought. I love my little E208. I'd buy the E208 GTI as soon as I could get my hands on it if I was able to.
After that, not quite as heated as I expected or feared Ferrari discussion. Maybe that's a sign. Never listen to your worst fears. It'll be fine. Let's get on to something altogether cozier and more wholesome, which is Abbi Pulling, the first woman to win a GB3 race, the first woman to win a F1 ladder single-seater series race since Jamie Chadwick did so at Formula 3 level in 2024. And certainly, one of that clutch, as we said in the last podcast, Georgie, of women in the modern era who are most likely to break through to that very top level. She did it in a reverse grid race, but she dominated from the front and, it never looked in doubt. Georgie, just how much of an achievement is this, first of all, for Abbi Pulling? And how much was this win needed for her profile, to keep her in the public eye, to keep her kind of development ticking on?
I think it's done great things for her, to be honest. And to say that she won from a reverse grid race is to almost ignore the fact that she got pole in the first race as well. So it wasn't the case that she managed to fend off the field. She was there on pace the whole weekend as well. She managed to even go faster between the races. She actually only missed out on the fastest lap of race one by 0.055 seconds from Nikita Bedrin, the current championship leader. So she had a fantastic weekend. It was a bit of a breakthrough for her, I would say.
Yeah. Jonathan, you saw the race as well. It was never in doubt, was it?
No, she absolutely controlled race one. Race two wasn't quite as good. She started third, which is also pretty impressive, but lost a couple of spots. And then I'm pretty sure she held fifth place for the rest of the race, which again, it's, that's also a pretty good result. Not as good as a win, but I was impressed.
Yeah, and I'm sure people who've been following Abbi Pulling for her whole career, like you have, Georgie, are not surprised by this at all. But does this now catapult her into a sort of new group of people who maybe hadn't followed her previously, even maybe in F1 Academy, people who maybe had doubted her speed or thought that maybe she was there for marketing reasons? Does it now kind of dispel that group of people a little bit and sort of move her further forward, Georgie?
I think there will definitely be some critics that she will have silenced. Inevitably, there will still be a lot of critics because a woman in motorsport is never going to be without them. But being able to win against the caliber of driver like Nikita Bedrin, he's a fantastic driver. He's been doing some really consistent pace over the first few rounds of the season so far. I think it says a lot about her trajectory, especially when you look at her progression since last season. She started the beginning of last season off pretty poorly, I would say. It really picked up towards the end of the season, which is to say she was getting, I think, 7th, 6th, 5th, maybe 4th at the best. And even coming into this season, you can see the next step forward again. I think her putting this win on the board cements that notion that she is a driver that has not reached her ceiling and is still progressing. And I think that might put her name on a lot of short lists that it might have already been on at some stages in her career, but it might have fallen off. It might be the case that she's putting her name back in some people's little notebooks, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I still think it was foolish of the Alpine Academy to actually let her go. I think they should have found some way to be able to keep her in the fold, although obviously there were ownership issues there as well. GB3, we were talking about another great British series, the BTCC, the other week. And it strikes me that the British motorsport ladder has undergone so many seismic changes since the 90s when people like me think it was at its best. But actually, there's a lot to be said about GB3. It does seem to have a really tight competitive field. Is that a function of how the series is run, do you think? Is it a function of the kinds of drivers and teams that it attracts? What is it that makes
I'm
GB3 a good
probably
series?
I think it's the fact that it's not really a domestic series. More than half of the races of GB3 are held outside of the UK. It's a continental series, if anything. It's a lower rung of Formula 3 than FREC. Well, if it's still FREC nowadays.
Yeah, I think it is.
Okay,
there was
I
a
feel
fact-
like
yeah.
that series is changing its name every other year. It's at this point, so I'm glad it's still FREC, but it's a step below Formula Regional, if you want to call it that, which is in turn a step below F3 Global or FIA F3. So I definitely think there's a place for it on the motorsport ladder that's not too far below that kind of Formula Regional, but I think the Formula Regional cars are more powerful. I think they're. I could be wrong on that. I think British Formula 3 British Formula 3, I'm calling it that now, use a Tatis car where I'm not sure what the current Formula 3 and Formula Regional is, but I'm sure the FIA F3 car is even more powerful again. So there's definitely like a step on the ladder for GB3. There we go. It's
Yeah.
GB3.
Well, and I still think Formula E is missing a trick constantly by having the women's test, by playing the diversity card once, twice a year sometimes, and then by none of the teams actually fielding any of the women they've tested in race cars. There is absolutely no reason why. So not necessarily Nissan, for whom Abbi Pulling is development driver, but why one of the lower ranked teams currently doesn't swap out one of its drivers, or maybe if there's a wet clash or something with one of the women they're testing. The worst that could happen is that the woman ends up at the back of the grid, but I don't think that's a disaster, because probably so with the man who came in with virtually no testing as well. So I just think if Formula E is going to be different to F1, different to the other series, Trailblazer series, etc., it's really got to take the kinds of risks it was doing early on in its iteration. Like when we had Catherine Legg and Michaela Cerruti and all the rest, and we're not getting them taking what they would view as risks anymore. Basically, I'm saying, Georgie, Abbi Pulling to Nissan, it's got to happen, hasn't it, at some point?
It's got to happen. Can you imagine seeing Abbi Pulling and Dorian Pan racing against each other in Formula E, just like they were racing against each other in Formula F1 Academy? Don't say W Series, Georgie. I think it would be
I'd rather
fantastic.
see Dorian alongside Kimi Mercedes in F1.
Okay.
There you go. Make her Kimi Antonelli's teammate.
Like
Put her in the big show.
Equally would be fantastic to see. What I think might be good to see as well, going back to the Luce and to tie that into Formula E, is in the history of very expensive cars used for spec racing series. I'm thinking of the Roof Spec C. I think, why don't we use the Ferrari Luce as Formula E's official support series? There's going to be a Stradale version, surely. Ferrari wouldn't have their first ever electric car not have a Stradale version. Come on, let's be real. Let's make a spec series out of it. Why not? They missed out on the minis.
It does have to be a fast Lecky car, because the trouble with the Jaguar I-Pace was they were just so flipping slow to watch on camera, and they actually looked slow in the flesh as well. So yeah, if it's something like a Ferrari Luce, why not? Although, yeah, I can think of many options that they might go for, but certainly it has to be something high performing. Jonathan, before we finish, I'll throw this to you. If you were picking an electric support series and it was one make and you could pick one car and it had to be like reasonable performance, what would you pick?
So in 2016, I tried persuading, 2017, I guess, repeatedly tried persuading General Motors that they should do a one-make Bolt series to support Formula E. A bit like the old Celebrity Pro-Am race that they did at the Long Beach Grand Prix weekend, where Toyota would bring along a bunch of Toyota Scions and then put like a couple of racing drivers and then a bunch of celebrities and then let them go at it. And that was always the highlight of the weekend. And I figured like an electric version with the Bolt. The first time I drove the Bolt, I was like, put sticky tires in a cage in this thing and give me a grid full of them. It'd be hilarious fun. GM did not go for my idea. So that was me. I would do one make Bolt racing.
Well, this is just the thing you've got to do. You've got to listen to journalists, folks, because that's how great things happen.
I mean, I was angling for the reason I suggested it was because I figured if they took me up on the idea, maybe they'd let me drive one in the race, but it never happened.
That would have been great. So Thank you so much, both of you. Dr. Jonathan Gitlin, rather. They can read you on Ars Technica.
Mm-hmm.
What are you working on at the moment?
I just spent some time talking to Sterling Anderson, he was in charge of the Model X and then autopilot at Tesla before he left there in 2016, and then started Aurora, which is a self-driving car company. And then last year went to General Motors to become their chief product officer. So I was talking to him about the way that GM is now using lots of virtualization tools, a bit similar to bring this back to racing. I don't know if you saw a couple of weeks ago, Dallara and IBM published a paper, actually a couple of papers, where they showed that you can use AI ML tools now to virtualize CFD to the point where it's good enough that instead of basically spending 20 hours doing a CFD run to try and work out the setup for your LMP2 car, you can do it with AI ML tools in a fraction of the amount of time, and the results are within the same margin of error. And so that's apparently now you can now do that for like computational fluid dynamics and finite element analyses and crash testing and designing the HVAC in your car, like that you can all virtualize now instead of like plugging stuff together. They're doing virtual handling tests with like prototypes before they even build anything, and so that all seems quite cool. And my readers will probably hate it because anything that has any hint of AI in it is anathema now. So
I mean, I think that I would love to do an AI in cars episode at some point. Actually, self-driving vehicles fascinate me. I spoke to a couple of people from NVIDIA, must be 6 years ago, and would be great to chat to them again, actually, because obviously, things have exploded since then. But
they will sell you the shovels, so they are particularly keen on everything having a NVIDIA graphics card in it because it makes them lots of money.
Okay.
Whether or not we actually need all these graphics cards or it's just NVIDIA pushing them on us, that we could discuss.
So, Jonathan Gitlin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will join you again the next time someone launches a controversial road car for which we need to dispel the haters. Georgie Mackay, I'm hoping we'll join you for the next episode of the podcast, where I think we might be talking about Forza Horizon 6. In the meantime, thank you for everyone joining the Motion Racing podcast. Do like us on YouTube and do all the subscribey bits and comment if you feel nice. And you can do the same on the audio platforms too. We'll join you again soon. Thank you very much.